Every great military power in history has collapsed following the exact same four-phase pattern. The Persian Empire followed it. The Ottoman Empire followed it. The Mughal Empire followed it. The British Empire followed it. Not one of them saw it coming. Not one of them believed it was happening to them. And right now, according to every measurable indicator, the United States military is deep into Phase 3 of this pattern. Phase 4 is defeat. I'm going to show you the pattern. I'm going to prove to you that it's real using examples spanning 2,500 years of military history. And then I'm going to show you the evidence that America is following the same path, making the same mistakes, exhibiting the same symptoms that preceded every great military collapse in recorded history. This is not politics. This is not opinion. This is pattern recognition across millennia of human conflict. What you're about to see will fundamentally change how you understand military power, imperial decline, and what may be coming for the world's current superpower. The clock is ticking. The pattern is playing out. And almost no one is paying attention. Before we examine where America stands today, we must understand the pattern itself. We must see it repeat across centuries and civilizations so different from each other that coincidence becomes impossible. When the same sequence of events leads to the same outcome across the Persian Empire of antiquity, the Ottoman Empire of the early modern period, the Mughal Empire of India, and the British Empire of the Industrial Age, we are not looking at coincidence. We are looking at a law of imperial decline as reliable as gravity. The pattern has four distinct phases, each flowing inevitably into the next if the underlying causes are not addressed. Understanding these phases is like understanding the stages of a disease. Early intervention can save the patient. But once the disease progresses too far, the outcome becomes inevitable. Phase 1 is military overextension. This is the phase where a great power, flush with success, extends its military commitments beyond what its economy and society can sustainably support. The victories keep coming, but each victory requires more resources than the last. The empire builds bases in distant lands, garrisons troops far from home, takes on commitments that seemed wise in the moment but accumulate into an unsustainable burden. In Phase 1, the overextension is not yet visible as a problem. The empire is still winning. The treasury is still full, or at least appears to be. The military is still feared. Critics who warn about overextension are dismissed as timid, as unpatriotic, as failing to understand the requirements of greatness. The empire has always expanded, has always taken on new commitments, has always found the resources to meet its obligations. Why should this time be different? But the foundation is cracking. The cracks are not yet visible, but they are forming. Phase 2 is economic strain. This is when the costs of military overextension begin to drain the productive economy. Taxes rise to fund distant garrisons. Debt accumulates to finance foreign wars. The best young men are drawn into military service rather than productive work. Resources that might have built infrastructure, developed technology, or invested in future productivity are instead consumed by the military machine. In Phase 2, the empire is still powerful, but it is no longer growing stronger. It is maintaining its position through increasingly desperate measures. It may debase its currency, as Rome did. It may borrow from foreign creditors, as the Ottomans did. It may squeeze its productive classes until they begin to flee or rebel, as the Mughals did. The symptoms vary, but the underlying dynamic is the same. The military is consuming more than the economy can produce, and the gap is being filled by measures that weaken the empire's long-term foundations. Phase 3 is military hollowing. This is the most dangerous phase because it is the least visible. From the outside, the military still appears formidable. The uniforms are still crisp. The weapons still gleam. The parades are still impressive. But inside, the substance is draining away. In Phase 3, the military can no longer attract the quality of recruits it once did. Pay and conditions have deteriorated relative to civilian alternatives. The best officers leave for private employment. Training is cut to save money. Maintenance is deferred. Equipment ages without replacement. The military develops elaborate systems for hiding these problems, for presenting a facade of readiness that masks the rot within. Most critically, in Phase 3, the military begins to lose the ability to actually win wars. It may still be able to deploy forces. It may still be able to destroy targets. But it can no longer achieve strategic objectives. It fights to stalemates. It declares victory and withdraws without having accomplished its goals. It begins to avoid conflicts that it would once have welcomed, not from wisdom but from a half-conscious awareness of its own limitations. Phase 4 is defeat. This is when the hollowed-out military encounters a serious challenge and fails. The failure may be sudden and catastrophic, as when the Persian Empire fell to Alexander. It may be gradual and cumulative, as when the Ottoman Empire lost war after war until nothing remained. It may be a single shocking defeat that reveals the rot to everyone, or it may be a series of smaller failures that gradually make clear what has happened. But the outcome is the same. The empire that once commanded respect through military power is revealed as hollow. Its enemies, who were deterred by its reputation, discover that the reputation was no longer backed by reality. The collapse accelerates. Former allies recalculate their positions. Former subjects see opportunities for independence. The empire fragments, retreats, diminishes, and eventually falls. This is the pattern. Now let us see it play out across history. The Persian Empire under the Achaemenid dynasty was the largest empire the world had ever seen. At its peak under Darius I, it stretched from Egypt to India, from the steppes of Central Asia to the shores of the Mediterranean. Its army was legendary, its wealth seemingly inexhaustible, its administration sophisticated beyond anything that had come before. Phase 1 began under Darius himself. The Persian military commitment expanded relentlessly. Garrisons were established across 3 continents. Wars were launched against the Greek city-states, against Scythian nomads, against rebellious provinces. Each campaign required more resources, more troops, more treasure. The empire was winning, mostly, but each victory stretched its forces thinner. Phase 2 emerged under Xerxes and his successors. The invasion of Greece consumed enormous resources and ended in failure at Salamis and Plataea. The treasury, which had seemed bottomless, began to strain. Taxes increased on subject peoples, provoking unrest. The gold reserves accumulated by earlier kings were spent on increasingly inconclusive military campaigns. The productive capacity of the empire was being drained to feed the military machine. Phase 3 developed over the following century. By the time of Darius III, the Persian military was a shadow of what it had been. The elite immortals, who had once been the finest infantry in the world, had become ceremonial troops more impressive on parade than in battle. The cavalry, still numerous, was poorly coordinated and inconsistently trained. Provincial levies were unreliable, their loyalty to the empire weakened by decades of heavy taxation and distant rule. The Persians had not stopped spending on their military. If anything, they spent more than ever. But the spending produced less and less actual capability. The gold went to corruption, to inefficiency, to maintaining the appearance of power rather than its substance. The military-industrial complex of the Persian Empire had learned to consume resources without producing corresponding capability. Phase 4 came with Alexander. The Macedonian army that invaded Persia was tiny compared to Persian forces, perhaps 50,000 men against an empire that could theoretically mobilize millions. But Alexander's troops were disciplined, motivated, superbly trained, and brilliantly led. The Persian forces they encountered were large but hollow, impressive in appearance but brittle in reality. At Granicus, at Issus, at Gaugamela, the pattern repeated. Persian armies that vastly outnumbered the Macedonians broke and fled. Darius himself fled from 2 of these battles, a stunning indication of how far Persian military culture had declined. Within 4 years, the largest empire in history had been conquered by an army smaller than a single Persian provincial garrison. The Persian military had not been defeated by a superior force. It had been defeated because it was hollow, because Phase 3 had progressed so far that even overwhelming numbers could not compensate for the rot within. Now let us turn to the Ottoman Empire, a military power that dominated 3 continents for 6 centuries before following the same pattern to destruction. Phase 1 of Ottoman overextension began in the 16th century under Suleiman the Magnificent. The Ottomans had always been expansionist, but under Suleiman, the commitments multiplied beyond any previous scale. The empire fought simultaneous wars in Hungary, in Persia, in the Mediterranean, in the Indian Ocean. It maintained garrisons from Algeria to Iraq, from Yemen to the gates of Vienna. Each commitment seemed justified in isolation. Each victory brought glory and plunder. But the cumulative effect was a military establishment that required constant warfare to sustain itself. The Timar system, which had provided land grants to cavalry soldiers in exchange for military service, expanded until it consumed a significant portion of the empire's agricultural land. The Janissary Corps, the elite infantry that had conquered Constantinople, grew from a few thousand to tens of thousands, each requiring payment, housing, and support. Phase 2 emerged in the 17th century. The economy could no longer support the military establishment. The traditional land grant system broke down as inflation eroded the value of fixed grants. The government debased the currency to pay its troops, which only accelerated inflation. New taxes were imposed, provoking rebellions that required more military spending to suppress. The Ottomans began borrowing from European banks, a fateful step that would eventually lead to foreign control of Ottoman finances. But in the moment, it seemed like a solution. The loans allowed the empire to maintain its military commitments without addressing the underlying imbalance between military costs and economic capacity. Phase 3 developed throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. The Ottoman military, which had once been the most advanced in the world, fell behind European forces. The Janissaries, who had been the first modern standing army, became a hereditary caste more interested in preserving their privileges than in fighting. When sultans tried to reform them, they revolted. When the empire tried to create new military units on European models, the Janissaries sabotaged the effort. The empire kept losing wars. It lost to Russia repeatedly, surrendering the Crimea, surrendering access to the Black Sea, surrendering influence in the Balkans. It lost to Austria. It lost to local rulers in Egypt and Arabia who saw Ottoman weakness and exploited it. Each defeat revealed more clearly how hollow Ottoman military power had become. There were reform efforts. Mahmud II destroyed the Janissaries and tried to build a modern army. The Tanzimat reforms attempted to modernize the entire state. But these reforms came too late and faced too much resistance. The rot had progressed too far. The military could absorb enormous resources without producing corresponding capability. Phase 4 came in World War I. The Ottoman Empire entered the war with high hopes, allied with Germany and Austria-Hungary, convinced that this was the opportunity to reverse centuries of decline. Instead, the war finished the destruction that had been ongoing for centuries. The military that looked formidable on paper proved incapable of sustained modern warfare. Logistics collapsed. Supply lines failed. Troops deserted. The empire lost front after front. By 1918, there was nothing left to defend. The empire that had besieged Vienna was now a rump state begging for terms. The Mughals of India followed the same pattern on a compressed timeline. Phase 1 began with Aurangzeb, who inherited a wealthy and powerful empire and immediately launched wars of expansion that would never end. He spent 26 years conquering the Deccan, a campaign that consumed men and treasure on an extraordinary scale while generating little lasting benefit. His military commitments expanded to include the entire subcontinent, a territory far too vast for effective control. Phase 2 emerged during Aurangzeb's own reign. The endless wars drained the treasury. Taxes increased until peasants abandoned their land. The Mansabdar system, which required nobles to maintain military forces in exchange for land grants, broke down as the land could no longer support the military establishments it was supposed to fund. Aurangzeb's empire was vast on the map but increasingly hollow in reality. Phase 3 accelerated after Aurangzeb's death in 1707. The military that he had led personally fragmented into factions more interested in court politics than in fighting. The Marathas, the Sikhs, the Rajputs, and other powers that Aurangzeb had nominally subdued reasserted their independence. The Mughal army, still large on paper, could not defeat these regional challengers. Phase 4 came with the European companies. The British East India Company, with forces that were tiny compared to Mughal armies, found that they could defeat Mughal allied forces with ease. The Battle of Plassey in 1757, where 3,000 company troops routed 50,000 soldiers of the Nawab of Bengal, demonstrated how completely the Mughal military system had collapsed. Within a century, the British controlled all of India, and the last Mughal emperor was a pensioner in his own palace. The British Empire itself would follow the pattern in the 20th century. Overextension across a quarter of the world's surface. Economic strain as 2 world wars consumed accumulated capital. Military hollowing as the costs of maintaining global commitments exceeded British capacity. And finally, rapid withdrawal from empire as it became clear that the military power to maintain these commitments no longer existed. The pattern is clear. The pattern is consistent. The pattern has repeated across every great military power in recorded history. Now let us examine where the United States stands in this pattern. Phase 1, Military Overextension. The United States currently maintains approximately 750 military bases in at least 80 countries. The defense budget exceeds $800 billion per year, larger than the next 10 countries combined. Military commitments include formal treaty obligations to defend dozens of nations, ongoing combat operations in multiple countries, and naval deployments that span every ocean. This is not a critique of any particular commitment. Each base, each treaty, each deployment can be justified individually. But the cumulative effect is a military establishment stretched across the entire globe, with obligations that would be difficult to meet simultaneously if multiple commitments were challenged at once. American forces are committed to defending Europe through NATO, a commitment that would require fighting Russia. They are committed to defending Taiwan, a commitment that would require fighting China. They are committed to defending South Korea and Japan, commitments that would require fighting North Korea and potentially China. They are committed to defending Israel, to maintaining order in the Middle East, to controlling shipping lanes worldwide. Any one of these commitments might be sustainable. All of them together represent a level of military overextension that has no historical precedent. Even the British Empire at its peak did not face potential great power conflicts on opposite sides of the globe simultaneously. Phase 1 is complete. The overextension is not debatable. It is measured in bases, in treaties, in deployment schedules, in the simple geography of American military commitments. Phase 2, Economic strain. The United States national debt exceeds $34 trillion. Annual deficits routinely exceed $1 trillion. A growing portion of federal spending goes to interest on existing debt, reducing the funds available for other purposes. The defense budget, despite being larger than any in history, is increasingly consumed by personnel costs, by healthcare and retirement obligations, by the maintenance of existing equipment rather than the development of new capabilities. The military-industrial complex has become extraordinarily expensive, producing weapons systems that cost far more and take far longer to develop than equivalent systems in other countries. The F-35 fighter program has cost over $1.7 trillion and still faces significant technical problems. New aircraft carriers cost over $13 billion each. The shipbuilding industry cannot produce vessels fast enough to maintain the current fleet size, let alone expand it. Meanwhile, the productive economy that must support these military expenditures faces its own challenges. Manufacturing has declined as a percentage of GDP. Infrastructure deteriorates. The workforce faces skills gaps in critical areas. The economic foundation that must ultimately support military power is showing strain. Phase 2 is underway. The economic indicators are not projections or warnings. They are current reality, visible in budget documents and debt statistics and industrial capacity assessments. Phase 3, Military Hollowing. This is where the pattern becomes most concerning, because Phase 3 is characterized by a gap between appearance and reality that the military itself may not fully acknowledge. The recruiting crisis is real and documented. Every branch of the military has struggled to meet recruitment targets in recent years. The Army fell short by 15,000 soldiers in 2022 alone. The quality of recruits has declined as the military has been forced to lower standards to meet quotas. Waivers for previous disqualifying conditions have increased dramatically. The pilot shortage is real and documented. The Air Force has been short of fighter pilots for years, with experienced pilots leaving for civilian airlines that offer better pay and quality of life. The training pipeline cannot keep up with the attrition. Combat squadrons deploy with fewer qualified pilots than their tables of organization require. The ship maintenance crisis is real and documented. Navy vessels spend extended periods awaiting maintenance that the shipyards cannot provide quickly enough. Deferred maintenance has become standard practice. Ships are deployed beyond their intended operational tempo, accumulating where that shortens their service lives. The ammunition shortage is real and documented. Stockpiles of key munitions have been drawn down to support Ukraine, and the industrial base cannot replace them quickly. Artillery shells, precision missiles, air defense interceptors, all are being consumed faster than they can be produced. The procurement dysfunction is real and documented. Major weapons programs routinely exceed their budgets by billions of dollars and their schedules by years or decades. The F-35, the littoral combat ship, the Zumwalt destroyer, the future combat systems, program after program has delivered less capability at greater cost than originally planned. And perhaps most concerning, the gap between strategic objectives and military outcomes is real and documented. The 20-year war in Afghanistan ended in chaotic withdrawal without achieving its strategic objectives. The interventions in Iraq, Libya, and Syria achieved regime change but not stability. The military has demonstrated its ability to destroy targets and kill enemies, but it has repeatedly failed to translate tactical success into strategic victory. This is the hallmark of Phase 3. The military remains large. The budget remains enormous. The technology remains impressive. But the ability to actually achieve strategic objectives through military means is declining. The gap between appearance and reality is widening. The United States military in 2024 looks formidable. It can project power anywhere on Earth. It can destroy any conventional military force it engages. It can strike targets with precision from unmanned aircraft operating on the other side of the planet. But could it win a sustained conflict against a peer competitor? Could it fight China over Taiwan while simultaneously deterring Russia in Europe and managing ongoing commitments in the Middle East? Could it sustain a high-intensity conflict for years, as it did in World War II, if the industrial base cannot produce ammunition fast enough to replace what is being consumed? The honest answers to these questions are increasingly uncertain. And that uncertainty is itself a symptom of Phase 3. The soldiers and sailors and airmen are still brave. The officers are still dedicated. The technology is still advanced. But the system that must recruit them, train them, equip them, and sustain them is showing signs of the hollowing that preceded every great military collapse in history. Phase 4 has not yet arrived. There has been no catastrophic defeat, no moment when the world suddenly discovers that American military power is not what it appeared to be. But if the pattern holds, and it has held for 2,500 years across civilizations spanning the globe, Phase 4 is coming. The question is not whether the pattern is real. History has proven the pattern beyond reasonable doubt. The question is whether it can be interrupted. Every empire that followed this pattern had opportunities to change course. The Persians could have consolidated rather than expanded. The Ottomans could have reformed earlier and more radically. The Mughals could have limited their commitments to sustainable levels. The British could have reduced their imperial burden before 2 world wars forced them to. None of them did. Each believed that they were different, that the pattern applied to others but not to them, that their particular circumstances made decline impossible or at least distant. Each was wrong. The evidence suggests that the United States is in phase 3 of a pattern that has led to the defeat of every military power that has followed it. The evidence is not speculation or projection. It is documented in recruiting statistics, in maintenance backlogs, in procurement failures, in ammunition shortages, in the growing gap between strategic objectives and military outcomes. This does not mean that defeat is inevitable. Patterns can be broken if they are recognized and addressed. But breaking the pattern requires acknowledging its existence, understanding its dynamics, and taking action before phase 4 arrives. History offers no examples of great powers that successfully reversed course after reaching phase 3. But history is written by what has happened, not by what is possible. Perhaps the United States will be the first military power in history to recognize the pattern and change course before it is too late. Or perhaps it will follow the Persians, the Ottomans, the Mughals, and the British into the long twilight of post-imperial decline. The pattern does not determine the outcome. But the pattern is real. And pretending otherwise is the surest way to ensure that it continues to its inevitable conclusion. What phase do you believe we are in? What evidence do you see that confirms or contradicts this analysis? What would reversing the pattern even look like? These are the questions that matter now, while there is still time to matter. If this analysis has challenged your assumptions or confirmed your concerns, share your perspective. The conversation about these patterns is itself part of how patterns get recognized and potentially broken. If these deep investigations into historical patterns and their modern implications resonate with you, consider being part of this ongoing exploration of how the past illuminates the present and warns us about the future.